Good evening, everyone. I'd like to call this special meeting for Great Island Advisory Committee to order at 6:04 on November 7th. I'm happy to let everybody know that the Great Island website is now fully set up with the official URL. It is greatisland.darien.ct.gov as the main address. The other domains that we had, greatisland-ct.com and ct.org, are now forwarding to this site, so all visitors will land on the same page with the official Darien URL. Again, it's greatisland.darien.ct.gov. So I want to give a big thank you to Bruce, working with Jeff Adams from our Director of IT and Reed Hildebrand to make this happen. Looking forward to seeing all of our residents at the next community engagement meeting, which is coming right up on November 16th. And committee members, if you're going to be there, there's RH is going to go through this, but there'll be the morning session and then the afternoon session on the island. If you are available for the afternoon session to help out in any fashion, please let me know sooner rather than later. Would be great. Our next meeting is on the calendar. It is at 6 o'clock on November 20th, and that will be held by Zoom, and it will be a presentation by JLP&D. Focusing on governance and interim management strategies. So please make sure that's on your calendar. That is a regularly scheduled meeting, so you should have it on your calendar already. Okay, next up is public comment. And do we have anybody that would like to speak? Okay, so Jack, I'm sure you know it's 2 minutes, and please give your name and address.
Jack Davis, 197 Hoyt Street, talking as a private citizen. You know, I look at this project, and there's limited time and resources to complete phase 1 and 2, which means that everyone has to stay on track and course, and I'm not sure that's been done. The priority. Out of the top 100 things that I expected coming out of this committee, ranking dog access is about 357. Process. There's 2 things that concern me about process. Number one, there's probably only 2 folks on this committee, Laura and Monica, who actually understand the total number of places that allow dogs to walk in this town. It's not the first time that it's been told, because Seth Morton has also mentioned that you don't have a full scale of all the assets that we have in town, including things that are open to the public from the land trust. It scares me that you didn't discuss this as part of that conversation of how many other places there were. And so you're making decisions in what appears to be a vacuum, and that scares the bejeebies out of me. Process number 2. There's a wildlife expert who made recommendations, and they were summarily dismissed. If we're not going to listen to them, then why are we continuing with those services, and shouldn't we just save the taxpayer money if we're not going to listen? Lastly, I was happy to hear that there's governance. My understanding was, in order to approve the $1.3 million, the RTM's top priority was governance. So I'm glad that we're dealing with it. We need to get that done, get implementations plans, and get that organized so the people who will be responsible for managing Great Island are the ones who are making decisions. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else for public comment?
Yes, I'd like to speak. This is Karen Ayub at 12 Baywater Drive. I am speaking on behalf of Juliet Kane, 81 Locust Hill Road. Her comments are as follows. While it's commendable that the committee commissioned an ecological study for Great Island, it's also concerning that its first action after hearing presentation of the study was to vote to allow dogs onto the island. The Reed Hildebrand survey did not solicit views on allowing dogs on the island, and its advice was to wait until a survey on the issue was completed before making a decision. The ecological presentation described the presence of the bald eagle, for example, which has both federal and state protections, with disturbance, broadly defined, being punishable by heavy fines and/or imprisonment. Many other species were identified which don't benefit from such protections, but which could be affected by the presence of dogs. The GIAC believed, however, that it was better able to decide this issue than the consultant. It based its decision on requests from residents who had approached individual committee members to say they want dogs on the island. The committee also voted in the knowledge and experience that many residents pay no attention to rules requiring dogs to be leashed. The committee believes it addresses this fact by having the RTM approve an increase in fines for violation. Although the trial period is not to start until appropriate signage is in place, dogs appeared on the island with days of the BOS vote. The dogs on leash period is also set to be October to March to coordinate with the rules for dogs on other town properties. This means dogs will be present during a critical part of the bald eagle nesting season. The dogs on leash decision was driven by chance meetings with residents rather than on scientific or data-driven analysis or the advice of experts. As others have also asked, shouldn't the committee be making science-based decisions for a taxpayer investment of this magnitude? Or at least listen to the experts it has hired? And there's a certain irony in the town being willing to pass laws to address a problem of its own making, but not to address wider conservation issues. Thank you.
Okay, we'll stick with.
Hi, Monica, Natalie Tallis here. I'd like to talk, but my video is not coming up.
Okay,
But if you can hear me, I'll talk anyway. Is that okay?
we can hear you, yeah.
My name is Natalie Tallis, and I live at 34 Baywater Drive. Darien invested $1.4 million to hire expert firms, Reed Hildebrand and Redness and Mead, to ensure Great Island is developed thoughtfully and sustainably. At your October 17th meeting, Reed Hildebrand delivered a report highlighting the island's unique ecological value and preliminary findings on residents' priorities. One recommendation was to fund a thorough environmental analysis of the property. However, Mike Burke pushed back and brought up the issue of dogs on the island. Why? Because it became clear from the presentation that dogs could potentially harm future preservation efforts. The Great Island consultants, to be clear, said nothing about permanently banning dog walks on the island. Instead, they advised postponing a decision until further data could be gathered and analyzed. The first public survey did not include specific dog questions, but residents' written responses voiced support and opposition. Reed Hildebrand again advised adding more targeted questions in the next study. Great Island and Board of Selectmen members said feedback supporting dog walks was overwhelming, but neither group considered that those opposed or undecided might have expected a more deliberate process. Both committees ignored our $1.4 million expert advice and voted to allow dogs on the island. The decision overlooks broader community views and the island's ecological needs by basing it on the loudest voices. As of now, dog walks will be permitted on Great Island until March 31st, even though Biohabitats urged this committee to allow dogs access only until February 1st to avoid disturbing the bald eagles during a critical nesting period, and to decrease the risk that the pair abandon the island altogether. It is baffling to see such a significant investment in expert guidance dismissed, especially when the advice aims to safeguard both the island's integrity and residents' interests. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else on Zoom?
Hi, Monica. I'd also like to take my 2 minutes. It's Julie Jones. Hi. I'm Julie Jones. I live at 15 Waverly Road in Darien. I just wanted to say how lucky we are here in Darien to have a breeding pair of bald eagles. It's wonderful they chose Great Island to be their home. What a huge responsibility for us as a town and as residents to have these species under our care. Bald eagles are a protected species under the Bald and Golden Eagle Protection Act. This act makes it a violation to take bald eagles. And I just want to take a little bit of time tonight to socialize the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's National Bald Eagle Management Guidelines on what that means. And this is imperative that as a town and as residents, we understand these, because the violations for these acts could result in a fine of $100,000 for individuals, $200,000 for organizations, imprisonment for 1 year or both for a first offense, and these substantially increase after a second event, if you have a second offense, and lead to a felony conviction. So the takings can be, actually what you think of, interfering with bald eagles, their eggs, their nests. I'm going to shorthand this because I'm short on time here, but it also includes disturbing bald eagles, and that's to agitate or bother a bald eagle to a degree that causes it to incur injury or decrease productivity, normal breeding, nesting, and abandonment. Our breeding season here in Connecticut is February through July. And so there's a number of things that the guidelines require. And I know on the last meeting, there was talk about we can't have music events. Like one of the things that there's a list of categories A through H. Yes, within a half a mile of active nests during breeding season, things that are prohibited include licensed fireworks, outdoor music events would be included, loud parties, gunshots. Also, during when non-motorized recreational human activities would include walking, hiking, fishing, hunting, bird watching during the breeding season within 330-foot buffer. Also off-road vehicles, which means public works maintenance vehicles would not be able to enter into the area during the breeding season. I know Monica, you're aware of some of these.
Maybe Julia, you could send us that, or actually, I think we might already have this, but you're out of time, I'm sorry.
Okay, yeah, I would just say my concern is that I don't think residents are aware of this because I've seen people off the paths. And I think a posting would be great on the island.
Okay.
And I'd love to hear from the committee what the plan is for enforcement, so we as taxpayers aren't responsible if this is tripped up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, anybody in the audience?
I do have a question. Can you I have hearing loss, so I can only see the few of you that are facing me. I rely on lip reading. And because you're doing Zoom now, if you put the activate closed caption, I could understand what's being said. So otherwise, I have to go listen to I can listen to the recording afterwards, but I'm reliant on closed caption if I don't see your lips directly.
Okay.
My name is Ina Gisnabi, 33 Beverly Place. Last Saturday, I took a walk on Great Island. Though dogs remain disallowed until current remediation work is complete, I passed 7 separate individuals, couples, or families walking their dog on the island within a half-hour walk. In 2 instances, in different locations, including near the maritime woodland, 3 dogs were visibly barking, 2 aggressively at each other. I mentioned this not to call out visitors violating rules. I believe they thought they were allowed, but to highlight there is no monitoring and control to protect the island. I have severe hearing loss and rely on a dog to serve as my ears for a range of safety situations, like fire alarms, cars, bikes approaching from behind, and more. So I do understand residents' compassion and vocal call for allowing them to walk their dogs on Great Island. Even I had hoped the town would be open to dogs so I could enjoy the island with him. My perspective changed after seeing Biohabitat's presentation and reading afterwards their accompanying words that stated dogs are a high risk to the fauna to the island, including legally protected ones. I believe more residents with dogs would also understand this too, if they were informed of the resident wildlife and risks dogs pose to them. Reed advised this committee to wait on their decision to allow dogs until further ecological study. But the committee proceeded anyway to allow dogs and for an extended period when federally protected species are known to be in the region. It is incomprehensible that the town is paying consultants but ignoring their advice. I also wanted to inform the committee that there is a wildlife habitat next to the access road to Great Island, which unfortunately the committee chose not to include in Reed's and Biohabitat's ecological study. There's a range of wildlife in this habitat, including a good-sized group of great and snowy egrets that I understand are legally protected and can be seen there from spring to fall. I respectfully urge the town to include this area as part of Great Island's ecological study and to understand how it can protect this habitat before any further developments on this road. Thank you. Oh, time.
Anybody else for public comment? Okay, thank you. Next is an update from Public Works.
Right to stand.
Sure. As long as the camera picks you up, Tony.
That's, whoa.
Right there.
No.
Nope.
Okay. Okay, we have two arsenic remediation projects going on. You know, at the orchards, we're gonna cap with 12 inches of material, 8 inches of fill, and 4 inches of soil. So the 8 inches of fill is down and graded, and the soil, we're getting tested right now, and we hope to start putting that down hopefully Wednesday, and maybe 4 or 5 days, and then have seed on the ground. The other one is the spot remediations. We have 6 plots that we excavated down to 12 inches, and then test the edges. Kind of 2 came out great. We're gonna fill those in. 2 are kind of medium. We're gonna do a little more testing outside the holes, outside the existing excavation. And 2 were kind of hot. We're gonna test at like 10 feet, 20 feet. In the meantime, we're gonna fill these areas because we got the 12 inches down, we'll have 12 inches of cap, and that'll take care of that. We're gonna try to get that done before the 16th. The stables, we had a report of a deer smashing through one window and out the other. And I didn't believe it. But I contacted the gentleman that gave the report, and he said, I saw the deer go through the window.
Really?
Yeah. He said, I saw the deer after, he didn't have any blood or anything on him. So that happened, and the windows.
So he saw the deer run away?
Yeah.
Where at the stables?
Kind of that hallway between the main part of the stables and the riding ring. Single pane, you know, it's kind of an easy fix.
You told him that horses stay there, not deer, right?
What's that? Yeah.
Oh,
The stall for
walkway,
horses.
the walkway between the actual stables and the indoor riding ring.
And the riding,
That
yeah,
really
that
narrow.
hallway there.
So
Yeah.
in one side, out the other?
In one side, out the other, yeah. Yeah.
My goodness. Tommy boy.
Also at the stables, the asbestos work is, they're gonna be finished tomorrow. We're gonna have a clean, you know, predict that it's clean, because it always is. Air test by Monday, we'll be totally good by the 16th. And that'll take care of the asbestos. We can check that off the list. Sandy Ridge from Parks and Rec. They used the stump grinder that the town purchased, I think it was last year, and they just did an awesome job. We ground down 35 stumps, the Parks and Rec team did. Soil, seed, hay, and then we need a little rain, but makes a big difference, and it looks great. They did a great job. 2 things to talk about: signage. We put signage up on either end of the bridle, saying that you can't bring your pets into the bridle. I had previously taken a camera away. You know, when the bridle opened up, I said, well, I don't need a camera there anymore because now people are allowed. Put a camera back there. You know, and none of it is to say, hey, you know, we got you. It's the idea of we want information. Are people breaking the rules or not? If they are, you know, we can adjust possibly. You know, we just want to know what's happening in that situation. But there's 4 signs, kind of 2, you can't miss them, and 2, you'll pass it out on the bridle. The other signage, all the signage that we talked about, Lori and Jeff did a lot of work on that and did a great job. All the signs are in. We're meeting on Tuesday. Lori, Jeff, town council, co-town administrator, probably a few other people, to just place these signs, and then starting either Tuesday afternoon or probably Wednesday morning, we're gonna have all the signs. We're gonna start to install them, and by Friday they'll all be up. Signs, some roping where we don't want you to go. I think there's 33 signs, and then the early access rules, the bigger signs, those I have those in to put the adjustments to the rules on there. That's all. Any questions?
No, I
Yes.
just want to say that we will for sure announce when everything is up and going.
Yeah.
And you think Friday is,
Yeah, barring anything emergency happening in town, we're gonna get it done.
okay, thank you for that.
When we met and talked about the different signage,
Yeah.
one thing we talked about is whether to put signage sort of identifying the area of the eagle's nest.
Right.
And we kind of decided against that, thinking might be, because you've shown me where it was. I went back and I couldn't find it again.
That's the way it is, yeah.
And it's really
not
hard to
easy.
find, so we kind of were thinking maybe it's better not to call attention to that, but based on what we've heard, do we have any different thinking about that? You know, warning the public to, because this is the area of the eagles, you know, maybe it's here, but.
You know, I think we're gonna,
Okay.
it's a special meeting, so we
Okay.
can't add that to the
Okay,
agenda.
but
But
Right,
we're gonna
we'll talk
address,
about that.
we will address that.
Let's think about that a little bit more.
Yes, we will
please.
address that.
Okay.
Even when you're looking for it,
It's hard to find.
see. I mean, it's very high up in the sky, and
Yeah.
it's in a very camouflaged.
Yes.
I have some
Space.
tricks, but they stay
I
right here.
followed your trick and I still couldn't find it.
Thank you.
Okay, next we are, I'm sure we're all looking forward to hearing the presentation from Reed Hildebrand. So Becca, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and thank you for those of you who are online for joining. And we have another basically very full agenda to bring to you. For some of you, if you're planning to come, as you've been urged, to come by Monica to the outreach event next weekend, you will hear some of this again, slightly different format. So bear with us, but it is so important for determining the direction. If you go to the next slide, please, Mac. Tonight, I'm here, Becca Sturgis, with everyone from Reed Hildebrand, and at my side is Meg Griscom. She's the project manager who's spearheading this with me at Reed Hildebrand. And then to my other side is George Knight, who is our expert architect and, you know, a true, I don't know, almost wizard of preservation. And so some of what he'll be sharing tonight are the early findings related to historic significance. Yes.
It's Ines, right? Would you like to sit up here so that you can see?
Thank you.
Because they'll be the ones doing the talking.
Great suggestion. Thank you, Monica.
Sorry to interrupt you.
Is what Ines said before, is that a toggle button?
I don't know, we'll
that we
figure
can
that out.
turn on the auto captioning? So that it's like,
But she's all set right now, so.
okay.
We'll make sure you can watch those of us who are speaking to the best as possible tonight. So that's who is with you tonight from the design team. And the next slide we have, which is basically at the request of the committee, and we think this is a great idea, we're going to begin each of these meetings going forward with a sort of where are we in the process summary. And a process like this, which you can sort of see for an island of the importance and significance and sensitivity of Great Island, is a multi-year process. It is too early in that process to be able to declare how many years that process will really be. In fact, one of the questions that we're looking at this year as part of the initial master plan is a sense of what that duration of the overall might be. What I can share with you tonight and what you see here is up to that yellow line is the first year of this process, and that includes two parts. The vision plan, which is what we're in right now. We're just past the halfway part of that vision exercise. And then through the middle of next summer, we'll be developing a master plan and a concept. And with that, the town will have sort of choices, and this committee particularly, and the selectmen and the RTM, about which of the parts of that plan to move ahead with. If we go to the next slide, we thought we would just zoom into the kind of process that we really are in right now, this 1 year process, and show you here with a red line. Now I'm self-conscious about, I think we maybe should look at our colors to make sure if people can't see all colors, we develop this so it's also able to be understood for people who can't see it, all colors. But so we're using red, which I know isn't maybe everyone's favorite color, to show where we are right now. And this slide is really focused not just on the calendar of the vision and master plan, but the outreach part of this exercise. And I think what has been really clear for the community is that what the community wants really needs to shape where we go with this master plan. And so this slide is really dedicated to the pieces or components, the steps of how is it that we try to assess and distill what the community is looking for out of Great Island. And so just to sort of summarize, there's many components to this, but in a very basic way, we have a set of large community workshops, of which we have completed one, and we have a second one in the vision phase that is slated for next Saturday. And that is sort of for conversation, for developing shared understanding. For those of you who are already reading the website and listening to these meetings, it's supplemental to that. One of the things that's really valuable is that there's sometimes nothing like live exchange and conversation, and we do have different experts at them, as well as the Reed Hildebrand team, as well as many members of the committee and other leaders from the community. So we really encourage as many of you as possible to come out on Saturday the 16th to Town Hall, where we are right now, for the next one and the final one that makes up the vision. We also have a set of experiential sort of parts of that, and the tours, some of which are self-guided, some of which people joined in the first, are a major part of that. There are other sort of ideas on the website for people to enjoy as well. And then I think it's important to share that we have really been kind of overwhelmed with the knowledge and participation from the focus groups. And focus groups are something that we have developed in our public process, where we really encourage the community to sort of self-nominate or nominate people who care or know a lot about specific areas that are important for us to address as we develop a plan. And so you can see the list of groups that we developed for working with you. It's ecology, education, transportation, water, governance, youth, history, and preservation. And so we've met, we have basically completed all those first round of focus group conversations, and I'll be talking a little bit about some of those later. As we begin the master plan, the next phase, there will be another round, and if there are people or topics that we have not covered, we welcome suggestions and nominations, because just because you didn't participate in this round does not mean you can't participate in the next round. And so we want some level of continuity, but we're really welcoming nominations or directions that have yet to be identified. Next. Okay, and then there are too many words really on this slide, but this is published to the website, and we want it to be a little bit more complete so that everyone has a full understanding of what we're seeking. The thing I want to highlight here, because I don't want to bog down too much of this evening about our process, but what the vision is really determined to do is to help us assess what the shared values are in the community, and to highlight maybe areas where there is some difference of opinion, and to then chart out a framework for how we get to a full kind of consensus-based master plan. So we are not suggesting that at the vision we will have reconciled all the differing opinions, but we will have isolated the topics about which there is the most concern and that maybe need the most attention. So just to like the bald eagles and the dogs, for instance, we know that there is a lot of animated concern and investment and really being careful and in both directions. So that's clearly, as just an example, something we need to spend more energy getting to the bottom of. I do not want to suggest that by January, Reed Hildebrand will have miraculously come up with a solution where every member of this community is going to feel heard and fully, satisfied. But we will have a path forward for you that we recommend about how we're all, as respectful as possible, and probably some level of compromise will be involved in that, just to foreshadow that part of it. Moving along. This is a diagram that is not a typical Gantt chart, so John, just for you, this is a more artistic version of a kind of way that actually in some ways communities come together and move through these things. It's a little bit more of a braided, multicolor way of thinking about your future, and it is not totally linear, and there are qualitative sort of parts of that, but there's push and pull, and there's a lot of movement, and things can shift along the way. So we're trying to continuously go in and out and bring everyone together, but then sometimes you need to separate to get to the right end. So just to say that there are many ways to look at this, but we do have a very clear process with multiple check-in points and multiple formats, and we're, sort of roughly a quarter of the way through that. Next. So today we're going to talk as it relates sort of overall, just to summarize some of the things that we've heard. We're going to touch very briefly on the agenda for public workshop number 2, and then we have some updates that we thought everyone would be interested in related to architecture and ADA accessibility, particularly just site-wide. So not ADA accessibility issues related to the buildings yet, but just related to the roads and signage and issues like that. Because, and I'll just share one of the reasons we brought both of these forward today is that there's a huge amount of interest and I would say even anxiety about the future of all the buildings and structures on the island and how the town cares for them and what uses are applied to them. And then secondly, there's enormous sort of consensus that not just access, but sort of fair access to seniors and to small children and to people with strollers or other needs is really, really critical. And so we wanted to sort of foreground some of the challenges that exist for people that have designated ADA concerns right now on the island. Next. So this is just a statement for everyone sort of explaining how, and I'm not expecting you all to read it, but for people who want to get into sort of a little bit more of almost terms and conditions, it describes how we analyzed all the feedback, particularly from the survey, because rather astonishingly, we heard from more than 10% of your community through the survey, which was really, I think, Gloria, it sounds like you did read every single comment, but it was so much feedback that we wanted to have sort of outside help processing it. And so we actually turned to 3 different AI generators and we tested a bunch of things. We also cross-checked it from a human point of view, and then we used Excel in a number of ways to try and be as analytical with what in the end at this point is functionally a very qualitative survey about what are the big issues in the community that people care about. So this will be all posted to the website, but we wanted to share with everyone the sort of process that we used to pull forward the shared and sort of most high level findings from this first survey and process. Go forward. So workshop 1, which was in person and conversational, one of the most popular parts other than the tour was the kind of comment, sticky note application of thoughts or ideas and suggestions to the map. And it just sort of looks kind of jolly by the end of the day. We've kept it in the office. It's sort of a souvenir for us. If we go to the next slide. This again is a little bit more detailed than is potentially easy to see on the Zoom screen, but what we did is we identified where all of the sticky notes were basically saying more or less the same things, and those are what is highlighted in these color blocks on this map. And so there were a number of areas that got repeat sort of nominations and desires stated. And so around education, for instance, there was a lot of interest in, for instance, the Scouts having some camping opportunity, or there being a campsite identified potentially in the marine woodland. There was a lot of enthusiasm around being able to walk your dog, but much more toward the tidal wetlands than toward the marine woodland. I think something else I would just highlight is that the 2 areas most nominated for events, again, maybe not so surprising, but the polo field and then the great lawn in front of the manor house. So keeping going here. We also really enjoyed the suggestion box. We'll have that again at the next Saturday event, and we'll have it at each of these events. One of the things that's kind of fun about the suggestion box is people do really write long passages. And so for those of you that really have a lot that you want to say, this is a great thing for you to contribute to. The other thing that I think is, just to share in terms of process, is a lot of people take the suggestion sheet And they never return it, but I think it's sort of a prod or something, so it ends up being a little take-home thing, even if they don't send it back to us. To highlight a few of the things here, we only actually received 45 contributions, although we gave out a ton of these sheets. The top themes that were identified, and again, these are not really a surprise at this point, but tremendous interest in preservation and conservation. That is what got the most mentions in the suggestion box of the 45 contributions. So questions related to some sea level or larger environmental issues as they apply, interest in really sort of stormwater and water quality. When it came to access and transportation, I think, again, no surprise that there was interest in parking, but also, as it relates to that, a desire to have the parking be very careful. And I think that word of sort of careful or sort of slow or very deliberate, these are some of the words that I would say came up again and again as we, just from all the different kinds of outreach. We were also really struck by how many people felt it was very, very important that there be accessibility accommodations for people on the island. Then as it relates to the buildings, I think there was a desire related to restoration, particularly care of the stables in the main house, but also caution about the expenses. And so I think these are themes that I think at this point don't seem to be surprising, but they're very clear in this suggestion set. So these are just pictures of the workshop and some of the boards. I thought you would be interested that we only have rough estimates in terms of numbers, but our sense was that in the morning we had more than 100 people who were involved and really engaged. And then in the afternoon session, it was quite a different group. So some people overlapped, but actually it was a lot of new faces in the afternoon. And that event seemed to be about 200 people or more. Our numbers, I think, are conservative here. So some people thought we had more like 500 people over the course of the day, but I think that's too much. Yeah, so we're going with sort of more modest numbers here. Next, to the survey. This word cloud you've seen before. I think I guess one of the things just to celebrate here is the kind of deep consensus in terms of just how beautiful and serene the island is. And I don't think there's too much, because I feel like we've all talked about this a number of times before. We thought this one we might spend a little bit more time on. This is a sort of summary slide about all the different things that people wrote in about. And in terms of that, there were these kind of broader themes, right? There were, for instance, on sports and recreation, there is a lot of interest in the community in trying to figure out what the right kinds of recreation or sports activities that make sense. And I think I can share this, comes up again later, but water sports are particularly ones that people think make sense here in terms of a majority of opinion. As it relates to commercial use and revenue generation, I think we were actually surprised at how little interest there was in like food and beverage or hospitality, while at the same time there was a lot of interest in larger events that are maybe more sporadic or weddings. So there's a kind of interesting tension there. I think we can keep going. So then I thought we'll just break down some of these areas a little bit. So related to the sort of potential tension between development and preservation, pretty much very large consensus that there's a set of upgrades that make sense to allow the island to be comfortable for almost everyone. And so that felt like a pretty strong direction for how we would think about maybe making changes on the island. As it relates to sort of development and revenue, there's much more mixed feeling about how to balance that and how to get to the right direction. And I think balance is the word that we took away. Like there's a real commitment to trying to find the right balance. Nobody is saying don't try and seek revenue, but people are very cautious about making sure that we do it in the right way. Next. In terms of facilities, I've highlighted some of this. already, but I think the reason we chose this particular quote is the amount of interest there is in making sure that the island works for the community year-round. So sort of all ages in year-round were two big themes that came up. And being able to support the community for events. And again, that maybe is a little bit bland, but that's also pretty clear direction. Next. So environmental conservation, again, a huge amount of interest and kind of consensus that one of the most important things about the island are the natural resources there. And I think a sense that everybody wants to enjoy the island, and there's a kind of recognition that having a lot of numbers and a lot of visitation to the island, there's some tension there about feeling like you're the only person in this sort of wonderful, pristine island, which is one of the experiences you get to sometimes have now, or one of 10 people, and how that quality is maintained even as we make it work for the entire community. Next. So I already touched on some of this, but really thinking about how to make the island work for pretty much everyone in the community seem to be very, very important. And I think there's something that isn't actually mentioned here that's worth raising, which is I think there's a sense that we have to make sure as we set up the transportation and the access for this island that it works not just for people who live close to the island, but that it works for everybody who lives in Darien. And so making sure that however we organize it, their shuttle services, if we don't have a lot of parking, and I think people really understand why we may elect to not have very much parking or even no parking on the island. There's openness, which is interesting to us, to having almost no parking on the island. But really committing to a shuttle program or some way that this island really serves the full breadth of the community. Next. So educational and cultural opportunities. Again, we need to dig into this, I think, a little bit more carefully. There is a lot of enthusiasm for particularly having the youth, but not just the youth, sort of all ages benefit from education on the island. And I think there's a sense that with the nature there, with the water, there's a sort of natural, or maybe it's a bad word choice, but there's a good overlap with educational purposes or desires, values in the community. The cultural activities and cultural opportunities, it was a little bit all over the place, and so there's huge interest in performances, like really majority of interest in having some performances, but then if you ask like just a general question about culture, not a lot of interest. So we need to dig into that because I would say it's quite a mixed message at the moment. Next. Again, we've talked about this. I think this question of commercial use and revenue generation is going to be, again, one of the more sensitive and thoughtful things that we have to get the right answer to, because people do feel that there's already been a very large commitment of taxpayers' money for the purchase of this. Feels like people are supportive of that, but the sense that we want to limit how much more taxpayers have to contribute for everyone to benefit. That's a clear message. And at the same time, real hesitation to something that might happen that would start to privatize portions of the islands that would feel not actually for everyone or not public. So there's more work for us to do around this. Next. Sports and recreation. Again, the word we're using here is just divided because there's a real mix of sentiment, and there some people who, for instance, would like paintball or, like even kind of noisy, wild, hectic activities, and then a ton of people who just are interested in things like paddle boarding and walking. Next. So we wanted to highlight here, and we've added, for those of you who've seen some of these before, we've tried to add numbers and percentages and sort of clear up like how many people were really sort of supporting different ideas. And you can see that more than 50% of the respondents were interested in ecology, health, wellness, recreation, and passive use, and then much smaller numbers, particularly as you get into things like hospitality. Next. In terms of programs, the only thing I'm really going to point out here, the passive personal use is by far the most popular kind of grouping here, but health and wellness and recreation also very, very popular. You can start to trace sort of themes, and there are some things like walking that show up in almost every bubble, and then there are things like water sports that also start to show up, and so we're going through the process of sort of trying to pull out the things that are even more popular than just 69%, and there are things like that, like walking with family, which we'll come to next. So again, this is our sort of bar graph looking at specific activities. We're going to ask more questions around swimming and the pool, because that's something that, as we looked more closely, this doesn't seem to do justice to. There does seem to be a lot of interest in being able to swim in one way or another as it relates to the island. Next. I think something that came forward in the comments that this doesn't do justice to in terms of other parks that people sort of go to and are thinking about as they think about Great Island. Waveney Park again and again was nominated as the park that people feel is in some way very relevant to how Darien as a community thinks about Great Island. And for some people, there are concerns about what's happened with Waveney, and for other people, they think it's just a wonderful model. But Waveney kind of came up more than any other park as sort of the park locally that people think we should be understanding this in comparison to. Next. I don't think we need to talk about this one. It's just about time and walking. Go to the next. There's a lag. Yeah. Well, keep going. The next slide is about how most people travel right now, and it's car. I think it's interesting that most people in Darien don't tend to use public transit, but public transit is something that people are very interested in sort of for Great Island. So again, that's just interesting in the ways that Great Island might be a little bit different from your other parks. Next. And then, most people, 92%, go with family to parks in this community. I think what's interesting here, just related to the particularly hot topic of dogs, is that here in this survey, almost 50% of the community really does enjoy walking with their dog. So whether or not that is something that we end up supporting in a more serious long-term way on Great Island, it is definitely something that is a much loved pastime for many people in the town. Next. Then these are our sort of bubbles of things that there is clear alignment on, and then the issues where we really need to dig into more. Some of the things that we can highlight related to what we know there's more work to be done on that I haven't touched on already. The question of how much the island really wants to be open and advertised to the large world, and how much it wants to be a little bit of a best-kept secret. I think there's a lot of interest in that, and I think that's related to just how wonderful it is, how quiet and how remote it feels right now. And so I think people have interest in sort of getting to continue to have that experience of being in nature when they're on Great Island. And so just worry that if there are too many people there too much of the time, some of that wonder is going to be compromised. If we keep going, this is a slide that we made trying to assess of the specific sort of 200 to 400 mentions around dogs, sort of where they fell, and to dig into that. And I think to the extent that these numbers are useful, because it wasn't targeted, has already been acknowledged as a topic for the survey in a specific way, there's basically even support and opposition for the people who chose to comment on the subject. So we don't, as has already been stated, Hildebrand is not wanting to take a position on this right now in terms of future direction, but it is something that we know the community does have opinions about, and the opinions are varied. Next. So to the focus groups, and I know I keep trying to move quickly, but we wanted, it's okay, okay. I don't want people to fall asleep.
Never.
So focus groups, here's the list. We're starting with ecology, which is actually, I think, how we really did start. If we go to the next slide. These conversations have been really, for the most part, so much fun, and we have learned so much. Some people got to participate or chose to participate in two, and I think that was interesting too, because for instance, there are some of the folks who joined for ecology who are also part of education, and so I think, you know, the idea that there are linkages between how we think about habitat and wild protection, and how, for instance, some of the high school classes that are learning to do field studies and derive scientific monitoring results, like how those overlaps might work is interesting. I think too, in a way that's not surprising given the strong volunteer traditions you have in Darien, there's a lot of interest in what partnerships might be possible as it relates to ecology, so that Great Island or the government of the town doesn't have to take on too much of this expertise, but there are organizations from the Land Trust to Soundwaters where or to the Audubon Society, where there's a lot of knowledge and willingness to contribute and help the town with the future of Darien. And then there were specific things that I think we can just highlight here, like a lot of interest in how a boardwalk or some kind of boardwalk system might work on the island as a way of sort of not just being fun and interesting from a recreational point of view, but is highlighting that there's like sensitivity on the ground, and that there's a reason sometimes you don't actually want to touch the ground, that you should be above the ground. Also, I think some really interesting thoughts that came forward about how the ecology of Great Island is a water-based ecology as well as land-based, and so how we think about really taking advantage of both. Keep going. So field learning, stewardship, education, partnerships, and sustainability, which is basically what I was all just talking about. But those were really the headlining words and themes that came forward. And we can shift to, did it just jump?
Education?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think maybe is there one before that? Or?
No.
Okay, great. So for education, we had terrific participation, including a teacher from the school system, the head of the Board of Ed, the superintendent, and then a bunch of other folks who are involved in education. And I think there was really strong sense that there should be a future of some kind of education and education programming on the island. A lot of openness to exactly how that could work, and if a partnership is the right thing, and if there need to be facilities or not, but just huge excitement about the possibilities there. And I would say pretty much the different people who are engaged in education would be glad to help develop some way of doing different kinds of teaching on the island. So there's a lot more to dig into in terms of potential there. Next. Related to transportation, this, I gave a very brief summary before our last meeting because we'd had this meeting before we last met. This was also incredibly illuminating conversation, and I think some of the findings here really relate to not just, I think, the widespread understanding that access is critical, that some kind of parking is critical, but that really as we think about transportation to the island, we need to be making sure that everyone is safe. And so safety as it relates to transportation came up for everyone who was interested in boat or swimming, really wanting to make sure that nobody gets hurt. And then from a fire marshal point of view, wanting to make sure that as we have people on the island, that those members of the community who are charged with safety are able to come to the aid of anyone or any building that needs them. Okay, next. Governance and revenue. This was one of the conversations that was interesting because it sort of went in a bunch of different directions, and that again is not surprising because I think there is a lot to explore here. And so we got to hear from someone who really does a ton of weddings in the community, and weddings are like the #1 thing that people have said they could imagine happening on the island, and it was interesting to hear particularly solutions where you don't need to build a super amount of infrastructure and parking and kind of permanent requirements, that there's a way to envision really successful and profitable weddings that don't require a huge amount of initial accommodation. I felt like that was one of the really interesting parts of this. And then also some really interesting conversations sort of thinking about the land trust, and if you think about almost the opposite end of operations or governance of sort of how little can you do if you're really putting conservation first, what that might look like, and sort of grants and public funds if we end up with a much more modest kind of direction for how the island wants to be managed. And then I guess one thing that is worthy, sorry, before we get off of that, I think the question for the committee and in some ways the community is to identify what is the target revenue or range that is desired. Or is that something that we don't want to do because we really just want to say this is what the island deserves and needs, and we as a community are going to figure out how to support that. But that was another conversation, and I thought that was an interesting one. Like, you can come out and say, we need the X number of million, this island has to produce every year to be, to do its job, or something else. The conversation on the 20th will really dive into this more, so I won't spend too much more tonight. Next. As it relates to water, again, this is a pretty amazing conversation and not really surprising given the number of people you have in your community who are involved in water either on a volunteer or on a professional basis. But I think we learned a lot about things like, I feel like actually one of the strongest ideas was potentially to enforce or to institute a no-wake zone in Ziegler's Cove, because the sense that now the island is an attractive nuisance, that really trying to get people, like, not saying that we want anybody to behave really differently, but just to be a little bit more clear with people about how they could be careful so that no one ends up getting hurt. And there's a lot of good reports that have come forward around waste management and water quality, and huge amount of information that came out of this session. Next. So youth, I think there were some new themes that came up here. I will say the one that maybe was most interesting to me was the idea that people would really love to be able to camp on the island, and that actually for that to be a success, only one campsite is needed, and it could even be in a lawn area, so it doesn't need to do any harm to any ecology. But that was something that we didn't really expect, but seemed like something that we'll want to pursue. Next. History and preservation. I think we'll hear more about this later, but I think one of the messages that came through clearly in this is some concerns and worry that the heritage and the sort of preservation of what is on the island might be endangered. And that's not a surprise. Often when you talk about history and preservation, people do express concern that that which we've had and came before could in some way be harmed as we move forward. So that was something we spent quite a bit of time talking about. Next.
Becca, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You mentioned preservation, but I didn't see it on that slide. Just for future reference, I'll be looking.
Oh, sorry. It says it at the top, but you mean what I just shared?
Yeah.
We didn't include it as a summary?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay, no worries.
Thank you. I apologize. Yeah, you're right. It says heritage. I think maybe heritage is the way we use, yeah.
Got
But
it. No worries.
I feel like actually just that's my reflection from being part of the conversation.
Understood.
Preservation is what I felt like came forward. So public, well, we could pause. Are there any questions? Because I feel like I just did a major delivery of information.
See, you were rolling, I interrupted it. I'm sorry.
No, it's great. It's great.
I have one.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce.
On the recreation slide,
Yeah.
you mentioned that there was interest in a pool.
Yes.
that's not the first time we've heard that in town.
Yeah.
It's been tossed around for years. It goes back to one of the comments that I had at a previous meeting, just about the scope of your engagement. And I think it's really important that we consider not necessarily, like, if people are saying pool and you're hearing it enough times, I think it's important that you're not just trying to find a place for a pool on Great Island because people have said that they want a pool in this town. In fact, I think that it's even more important now that we have Great Island, that everything's on the table, so that other properties that might work for a pool maybe work better now, because people are, it's
Yes.
a game of musical chairs, right?
The juice is
And
flipping.
so now that people can go to Great Island to walk and to do this, there might be less parking at another facility, which may potentially, so I just want to make sure that because your engagement has a clear perimeter
Yes.
around it, that we don't lose sight of the fact that maybe there is a pool, but maybe the pool doesn't belong at Great Island.
Yes.
Okay? And so I just think we need to be careful about that before we go too far down any path.
I really appreciate that, and I think one of the things that we've said before, but I guess I can say it now, is that actually Great Island is quite small, and then it's even smaller when you take all the constraints and the topographic challenges. And so in some ways, for it to be most truly what it, like the best possible future, it may be that limiting and being incredibly targeted or narrow about what we see as the best future, that may end up being, which is maybe what you're sort of suggesting, Bruce, that may be the vision, or by the time we get to the master plan, that may be where we go. We're not there yet,
Yeah.
so, and I, just in response, just maybe to summarize, we were struck, and this was even true before we last met, before we read all the comments, but we were struck actually at how much consensus there was about some of the sort of best, like the beauty, the nature, the water. There's a lot of clarity about those issues, and then things like the balance between preservation and conservation. There's more work to be done, but that, like, people are aware that it's the balance between those things, and use that makes sense of the big investment. That's where we have to do more work. So,
And you just sparked one more thought that, about the size.
Yeah.
So that also struck me too when you were talking about the comparison to Waveney. I believe Waveney's about 5 times bigger with much less wetlands.
yes.
So, we're 60 acres and we have quite a bit of wetlands that makes it either unusable for, there's areas where it said like potential grass parking or something, but that was in the open space A or B section. So that's like not even an option. So, but yeah, I mean, I think it's really important for the members of the community to understand that it is, as much as it's expansive and beautiful because your sight lines are out to the open water and things like that, it feels bigger than it is
Yes.
when you're walking it.
Yes.
But just, square footage, it's not that big.
Yeah.
It's 20% of the size of Waveney, I believe. And so just keeping, as we say, like, oh, we want pickleball courts or a pool or this or that. It's, and I'm happy to hear, because I hear feedback the way we all hear feedback from friends, family, and everybody else, that I think passive recreation is, as you said, I think it was 70%.
That's really high
in the
level
surveys,
support, yeah.
is probably the most. So, I mean, the fact that it is pristine and a gem, and we're at square one, I think, as a lot of us have heard, go slowly and keep everything, all the town assets, like, for example, like we talked a little bit about revenue there, like, well, is there a P&L attached to any other town assets in town? that are parts of Park and Rec or anything like that. You know, are we considering putting a P&L on Great Island? And if so, why? Right?
Yeah.
So,
And to that point about going slowly, you know, we were talking about this on the way down here, one of the main comments that we heard both in the morning and in the afternoon of that community engagement workshop was a repeated request to move slowly, carefully, methodically, with, you know, decisions based on facts and education, and, you know, so I think there's just a real desire to see things move very incrementally so that there aren't any missteps or moving too fast.
The public workshop is coming right up on November 16th, and it's a little bit of a simple structure for that day. We wanted to build off of what felt to us like a success last time, and so we're basically repeating the schedule. So in the morning, there's a session in Town Hall. Because it seems like this is a community that's very prompt and likes to get down to work, we shortened the meet and greet. And so just fair warning, if you're paying attention tonight, get your coffee and drink it fast, because you can't bring the coffee into the big hall. It will be there, but you've got to drink it fast. The presentation will begin at 10:30. Meg and I will be speaking, George will be speaking, and then Josh, who was here at the last meeting from Biohabitats, will also be speaking. We will have another round of boards for people to engage with and ask questions. And then as soon as that event is over, we will launch General Survey 2. And that will have questions that are more narrow and more targeted, related to trying to get a little bit, not just a little bit, quite a bit more precise about, is there a mission or a vision for the future that people already feel really passionate about, related to, let's just say, one of the missions that we're writing right now as a possible draft is really around conservation versus, let's say, preservation. So the people who really want ecology to be first and foremost, we're going to give them a chance to really weigh in on that. And we'll share the findings from that roughly 3 weeks after. So we'll have, I think, some level of preview, we think, for the December meeting to be able to share with you. And we're not going to have open-ended questions, so we'll have the suggested talks, but because we want to be able to get the results faster so that we can be authoritative in the wrapping up of this phase. So that's the morning session in Town Hall, General Survey launches, and then in the afternoon, it's just experiential. There's a 1 p.m. departure from Town Hall to the island, and there will be a set of guided tours. There are 3 that have been identified. One is architecture, and with some availability to the interiors of just a few buildings, in an ecology tree walk, and then a children's treasure hunt. And we would like to encourage those of you who know families with small children to come to the treasure hunt in the afternoon. We'd love to have more children this time if that's possible. Yeah, come on. And then there also will be self-guided tours if you want to kind of do it yourself in the afternoon. And then at 3 o'clock that session ends and the buses go back to Town Hall.
Okay.
Yes.
On the survey, if it's all, if there's no open-ended questions, would you consider shortening the return time?
That's what we're doing.
Yeah.
We're going to shorten it. So I forget if we're going to do just 2 weeks. I think it's closer to 2 weeks. We wanted to keep it faster this time. Yes.
So do you remember what your response was like for the last time?
We had a lot in the last week, and that's partly though because I think of the email that went out to the full parks email list.
So we'll do that sooner.
I think if we do that sooner, because that generated something like 500 responses.
Right, and that was late.
Yeah.
That was late.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll do that much earlier.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this would close it before Thanksgiving?
I think we were thinking, I think actually the date that we sent was, we want to close it end of day Monday after Thanksgiving, so that for people who get distracted by Thanksgiving, that's not the deadline, and if they're not in town or they're hosting, they don't have to worry about it, but they have one day to get it done after the holiday.
So maybe,
If you don't like that, Lori, and you want it to be 2 days or 3 days, we could
I
extend
think
it.
it's a little tight
Okay,
with
so-
people, with their family coming and going.
So maybe we do the Wednesday of that week.
I think Wednesday to Sunday, you almost have to carve out and say, this is not what people.
It would be the Wednesday after.
So the Wednesday.
Yeah, Wednesday after Thanksgiving. Does that sound good to you guys?
yeah, and that way
Okay.
town can come back to work
And have a few days.
And well, no, and push it out
We
again.
could send
Okay,
one
great.
last blast
Great.
out or something.
Okay.
Do we know which buildings we're going to be able to get into on the afternoon?
What do you want to say, George?
Well, I mean, it's really exciting. I think my impression is that a lot of Darien citizens are eager to see the inside. Many have seen them from the outside. Many have, I think, but I think there's a pent-up interest to see some of the interiors, and I want to satisfy that. I'll say, from my perspective, I want to make sure that we're careful about the conditions of the buildings that we go in from a public safety perspective, because the Manor House surely is maybe the thing that people are most interested in seeing, and it's the one that is in the state of most disrepair, let's say. No one's lived there for more than 50 years, and so it's predictably in quite a state. So I'd want to rehearse with you like where and how we might lead a group through, because I've been parts of tours and my own self wanted to peel away and look at all sorts of things that I think we need to be careful not to let people do. So I rehearsed today. I was on site, and we walked through the main house and I think through the front door into the foyer, the living room, the dining room, maybe even into the breakfast room, the octagonal room, and through the pantry. But I'd really want to make sure people didn't leak into some of the more remote parts, not because they're not interesting or worth seeing, but they're just not in a state of, public
Yeah, I'm not
public
even sure the
reception.
kitchen.
I know. I think that might be right. So maybe we just go into we peer into the octagonal room,
Right.
and then
circle
come back out.
yeah.
I think that would be a really still very satisfying tour for the main house. And then I think that the carriage house, I thought we could open the doors and people could walk in there and just see that space. Obviously, not go up to the mezzanine. And then, I thought it would be the boathouse. I think has a lot of interest for people I've heard. It's a space that actually is maybe the most dangerous, I would say, from a fall perspective. So it's possible we could let people into the front first room, and they could peer through openings, but by and large, go no farther than that. I think
That's our draft list.
That's a draft list, yeah.
That would be great.
Did you say stable?
Question?
Yeah, so the stables, I think we're,
One second, Mike.
I think the stables we also have on the list, because I think we didn't actually really give people a tour of the interior of the stables, so people went in, but we were thinking, given the significance of them from a historical point of view,
Yep.
that we might add that. So we're refining, as is clear, we're like refining that tour right now.
Okay. Yeah. Mike, you have a question?
With regard to the next survey, will we as the committee have an ability to view that survey before it is put into the field?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think going back to the stables, I think that there were a fair number of people that didn't venture in, and that's a pretty interesting building too, so.
Yeah.
And it's probably the most accessible of all the ones we've talked about, as it's had the most people in it the most recently. It's all really the most interesting parts of it to the general public, I believe, are all on that first floor.
Yes, yeah.
There's a really nice kind of loop that you can
Yeah.
do there.
Yeah.
I think we should definitely
Yeah.
have people in there.
Well, if you got 4 structures and they're guided tours, that's going to be very time consuming
I
as
know.
well.
I know,
So-
it's a little.
That's, so
Unless
that's
it's
why,
free flowing.
right, so that's why, just to be clear with everyone, we're in the formation of it to make sure that we have the timing, and I think.
Right.
Well, it's staffing,
I think
too.
exactly, so
Right.
I think the other thing, which you'll see if you've seen the note about it that went out to everyone today, but we may also make decisions the day of, depending on how many people come, because if it's a smaller group and we can take them slowly through, then we might actually see more things. If we are trying to make sure everybody has a positive experience and there's a high turnout, then we actually may even change what we do the day of.
I mean, the boathouse seems, I think it's kind of a misnomer almost, because everyone thinks it's probably some beautiful boathouse that's got boats in it or something, but that it doesn't. And so I think, yeah, it's more like like you're saying, you know, a storage shed right now. So I would say, I would suggest maybe take the boathouse off and then put like a sawhorse or something in front of the carriage house so that you can peer in and see that it's voluminous inside. And you really can get the whole thing, but you're not really putting people inside that building. And then that leaves you with your staffing of keeping people
For the manor house and the stables.
in the manor house and the
potentially.
stables, exactly.
Okay, great, thank you guys. Thank you all.
Hey, Becca, it's Jim Perry. I'm not sure if you guys can hear me. I didn't necessarily, on the survey, will we all get a chance to kind of take a look at that and comment before the next one goes live?
Yes.
Yes.
Although probably
Perfect,
not a
thanks.
huge amount of time to comment, but yes, you'll get time to comment.
Perfect, thanks.
And I just want to make everybody aware that you can sign up for the bus. There are 2 buses going, so it's, I think, 88 people that we can take on the 2 buses. So, and you can also park at Pear Tree. There's no beach sticker required now, so you can park there and walk over. And the tour will, everybody will be meeting at the stables. The bus will be dropping people over by there, and the tour will start around 1:10.
Yeah.
Right? And the bus will be leaving from Town Hall, so you can, I believe it is online right now.
It is online,
It is
yes.
online right now, so you can sign up right now.
And please do.
And please do.
Great. Next. We are going to talk more about this, I think, at the outreach meeting, but there is part of our work right now, which is separate from the outreach, is really trying to understand and distill down information about the island to share with everyone. And so we just wanted to preview a working draft of a drawing that is trying to summarize the different constraints or limits that are starting to be known or understood on the island. And so, for instance, out of the ecology report, there are a few areas that really have more sensitive habitat. I think also something we were asked to highlight, which we'll be doing more of, is really trying to share the full history of the Ziegler estate and how it was sold off and what portions of that estate are actually owned by the town under Great Island. So for instance, the sort of peach color up there of the title areas, there's a conservation easement over, and so the town has, or the Conservation Commission has a sort of say, but they're actually not part of the purview or even really the outright control of Great Island or the town. And so just to share that we're going to be continuing to do work to be as clear and distilled as possible about where there's meaningful limitation or reporting or sensitivity about what we can do and can't do. I guess another thing to highlight is there is this 100-foot offset from the coast that is both a kind of coastal deep regulation and a kind of easement or a conservation condition on the property. And so anything within that 100-foot boundary from the water's edge, we need to be incredibly careful about how we understand what happens there. Okay, let's go next.
So next, I just want to touch base quickly on accessibility. So not surprisingly, the island definitely has some accessibility constraints. We know from the report provided by our consultant, KMA, Josh Softy and his team, that predictably, Great Island has, due to, wearing over time and just not having this as a standard at the time that it was built, certain areas where it doesn't meet ADA accessibility. So given that our understanding is that a mandate from the town is that this really be an inclusive and accessible project, we have a report here that just shares with you some of what's been identified early on as constraints relative to accessibility for the island. So not surprisingly, walkways with slopes that are greater than 5%, walkways with cross slopes that are greater than 2%, and then excessive cross slopes that head towards storm drains. We also know that relative to walkways, existing barriers here, such as, cobblestone surfaces where there's abrupt level changes, changes in surface materials that are abrupt, tend to be problematic. We also know, typically barriers within the walking surface, such as manhole covers, grates, typically with openings greater than 1/2 inch, speed bumps. All of these are going to be considerations relative to updates to the walking surfaces for Great Island. We also know that relative to pedestrian infrastructure, there are going to be considerations relative to where there are stairs, where there are, portable toilets that are perhaps not placed in the right location, that are not accessible for wheelchairs. Additionally, the same applies to trash cans and locations of trash cans. We also know the same applies to lighting. Typical considerations include making sure that light shines down, it's directionally downward, making sure that there's adequate lighting related to crossings, parking, drop-offs, bus stops, stairs, and wayfinding signs. And then on the topic of signage, just this early report really does indicate that the existing signage that is on the island is fairly limited, it's fairly ad hoc, and it does definitely lack directional information to all of the different island locations and facilities. So that will be something that will need to be addressed relative to wayfinding signage. One of the other areas that's been studied in this report is really working to understand building entrances. And so this is just a quick snapshot that basically helps us to understand that per the 2010 ADA code, at least 60% of all public entrances need to be accessible. And so this is a diagram here that shows, of your 9 structures, approximately 5 of them in the blue color are structures for which making 60% of the entrances accessible, fairly minimal work with grading solutions. The remaining 4 shown in orange are those for which making 60% of the entrances would be slightly more complicated and probably require constructing a ramp or a lift. And these are just some quick images of some of those conditions, looking at the entrance here to the boathouse, both the front and the rear, looking at the entrance to the beach cottage, both the front and the rear, and also the bathhouse. So you can see these are fairly good examples, at least related to the boathouse and the beach cottage, that provide relatively straightforward solutions towards being able to access the building in an accessible manner. However, looking at, for example, the Sunset Terrace, most specifically the estate house on the front, side, and rear entrances, this is where you're going to have a much more complicated set of conditions relative to how you negotiate accessibility and ADA compliance. And then again, similarly, looking at the greenhouse and the White House, both of these tend to have much more complicated ingress and egress conditions where you have steps and stairs and very complicated access points that you cannot solve just with simple grading solutions. And then similarly, looking at the stables, this actually is, compared to some of the other buildings on the site, going to be slightly easier to remediate relative to access. This is a quick diagram looking at the outdoor event areas. One important thing to note about this is that typically meadows and lawn areas are inherently not accessible. So if a majority of the programming that's being offered on the site is in these areas, accessibility will need to be provided, and there will be a variety of strategies for that depending on whether the programs are temporary or permanent and what the surfacing material is going to be. So this is just to reflect for you all and predict that there's going to be a series of considerations for you all as you move forward with some of this decision making. Relative to water access, again, if multiple locations for kayak launching are provided, moments like this on site, you'll want to make sure that you have at least one of them be accessible. Similarly, relative to beach access, making sure that at least one area is accessible. And then, of course, making sure that you factor in for toilet rooms, showers, or other facilities that will also need to be accessible. And ideally, for really the experiential component of the site, we want to make sure that It's not just about the physical structures, but that as you experience the site, having views be part of what is made accessible to visitors on the island, be a key consideration as well. And as part of that, that's a very logical segue, George, for you to speak a little bit more detail about the architecture.
Okay, we've been making a lot of progress in three distinct paths, basically. One, trying to understand the history of the structures on Great Island, and then another, documenting those structures, translating them into finite drawings that we can then use for all sorts of purposes for going forward. And third, a facilities assessment where we're looking at the conditions of the buildings, particularly their envelopes and the structures, which are going to be the key health points of the building. So with regard to the first, the architecture has been really interesting. There's not a lot, I'll say, of material that we can find that directly relates to the history of the architecture. We've a lot of circumstantial material, but for instance, there are not a magnificent roll of drawings that we can unroll and describe the main house. But we've done a lot of research and identified three different architects who we feel quite certain have worked on this house and property, the buildings, and have visited several of these resources. Avery Library at Columbia University is the largest repository of architectural drawings, and we've had some success there with the Guastavino collection, which is there, and have found a drawing of the stables that is really interesting to look at. And that ties us to the architect who we are quite sure did most of the original buildings on Great Island, Harry P. Knowles, who is not a household name yet. Maybe there'll be a revival at the end of this. But Harry P. Knowles is best known for doing Masonic temples, and the conjecture is that the Ziegler Sr. and Jr. were both prominent Masons, and that's how that relationship was first established with William Ziegler Sr. And that as a fairly young man and not particularly had not built much, he was brought to build the main house, and something like must have started around 1903. We're using 1905 as a likely point at which the main house was finished. And then as the wood stables burned down, we actually know for certain that Knowles was hired in 1915, and Knowles in turn hired Guastavino as part of his team to build the stables that we have today. And that's the only thing that we can say absolutely is Knowles. But because stylistic associations, we can be quite sure, I think, that the entry house, which is not even in the property, but the lodge, I guess it's called,
Gatehouse.
The gatehouse, and the greenhouse, and the main house, the carriage house, and the stables were part of this original Harry P. Knowles designs. We know also that the main house was changed dramatically in its third incarnation. All that happened within the first sort of 20 years of its existence. So it has been this way for more than 100 years, or about 100 years. But there were two major transformations that occurred in the early days of that house after William Sr. died. And they involved two prominent architects. One is Addison Meisner, who came from Florida, had a very, very successful, important practice in Florida. And so we've looked at some of the materials that exist in Boca Raton, and unfortunately not found any smoking guns, but we know that he worked in Darien, and the Weeburn Club was one of his major projects. And concurrent with this, we know that the Zieglers were very involved in the formation of that club, so it all makes perfect sense. And then as William Jr. remarried, we think there's a sort of stylistic shift, and that the Zieglers had been working with a prominent American architect, William Lawrence Bottomley, who designed a home for them in New York City and in, I think, Virginia. That Bottomley himself came and did some of the transformations of the main house. We think we're quite sure that the dining room, if you all know that, is a work of Bottomley. And I was at the house today, and in the basement I found a drawing of a very small little detail unbuilt that is of William Bottomley's office. So again, the pieces are starting to come together. I think we have a very credible skeleton, and I'm not sure how far we'll be able to go if these materials actually do exist anymore, but I think we've built a very, very credible timeline about the histories of these various buildings. I was in, and I'm embarrassed to say, for the first time in what was originally called the Playhouse, now the Pink House, and I feel quite certainly that building from 1928 was also designed by William Lawrence Bottomley, and it's really quite a beautiful structure, and I think could be rather valuable to a number of different uses that we might be thinking about along the line. So it's been a really interesting process of building this architectural history and learning more about various characters who contributed to the structures on Great Island. We can keep going.
What's the 1936 film on Great Island? What is that?
So one of the really interesting things that Monica helped us organize was a walk with Ned Steinkraus through the whole property. We had a wonderful day with him, half day, and he alluded to a film that his grandfather had made, William Jr. had made, about Great Island. And indeed, we've now, thanks to your team, we've digitized it and have been able to view it, and it's a home movie almost, with very high production values from its time of life on Great Island. So it's a whole story about the workings of this extraordinary place that goes into the agricultural and the horses and the dogs and the family and polo, and it's quite something to see. It's not in great condition. We have a digitized copy of what I think is a VHS recording that was taken from a film, so it's several generations away from, the sound is not great. I think there's some synchronization issues and things like that, but one sees moving images of extraordinary gardens and the activities of the place, the families using of the house and playhouses. The horses are featured, as you would expect. The dogs. So it's a really interesting resource. It's dated. It's very much of its time, with everything that might mean. But it's a fantastic resource. So.
Yeah, I just want to make clear that this is a personal movie for the family. So this was just shared for historical purposes. This isn't something we'll be putting up on the website.
Yeah, so we can, so on the lower left corner, so we're sort of talking about fragments. The lower left corner is this drawing that feels very important. This is the Guastavino Fireproof Building Company's drawings of the stables that came from Columbia University. And the upper right picture, those of you who know that main house know that it doesn't look at all like it does in that picture. So the house has been radically transformed there. It has 3 stories, it now has 2. It has a slate roof there, it now has a tile roof. Everything's changed about the character of that, but yeah, thank you. Yeah, this is just going into some of the details of that, and again, you can see photographically the transformation that occurred from the original Harry Knowles design, and then the prominent influence of Addison Meisner, who brought this Hispanic architecture from Florida and built that sort of freestanding Gothic apartment, basically, that was connected to the main house that you see in the lower right-hand slide. We think that Knowles was the designer of these 3 masonry outbuildings. The greenhouse, in the same way that the stable was supported by the Guastavino, the greenhouse was supported by Lord and Burnham, who were a greenhouse designers and worked at the New York Botanical Gardens and did some of the buildings there. And then the White House is a peculiarity insofar as we're quite certain that it is the oldest structure on site that predates the Zieglers by a good number of decades, but it's a very small portion that is the original part. For instance, the facade that looks so like it might be original is in fact not so. That's on a foundation. It's made of poured concrete, modern framing. So that's new, we conjecture about 50s. If you see the bay window, there's a stone foundation there and some original framing material that you can see in the basement. So there's a fragment of a 1820s house that's then surrounded by several generations of construction that go all the way through the 60s when the Steinkrauses were adapting for their own use. There are fragments of original materials, doors, hardware, things like that that are inside the house that I think have been relocated, maybe even brought in from other places to the house. But it's a puzzle unto itself. So this is just a few slides that touch on the survey that has been going on. It's now largely complete of the existing buildings, which is proving enormously valuable to us as we take effectively raw data and turn it into architectural drawings. And you can go forward, Megan, but this will be surely a great resource to anyone interested in Great Island. The upper image is a sort of a screenshot of a very comprehensive drone survey of the island that allows, it's interactive, and you can go to virtually any point on the island and zoom in with quite extraordinary resolution to see overhead views of various things. It's proved valuable to us as we've been doing assessments of roofs and totally inaccessible places in these various buildings that then we've been able to see and understand them. And then finally, the facilities assessment, which is underway. Currently, we're working with WJE, who's a buildings forensics specialist, basically, who's advising us and helping us prepare a report that we'll be looking at drafts of right after Thanksgiving, and ultimately building it into a larger report that we will give you all about our findings. And then what we've started to do here, and I think this might be one of the more important things just to put onto the table, is I think that there'll be a handful of criteria that you all will be assessing and will be helping you assess to evaluate buildings and think about strategies going forward. And one of the criteria will be the cultural significance of the architecture on the island. There'll be other ones as well. But we, from the research we've done to date and what our findings to date, we put provisionally sort of 3 tiers of cultural significance, ranging from exceptional significance, considerable significance, and then some significance. And this has been a tool to help us sort somewhat the historic significance of these buildings. And what we found thus far, what we're proposing, is that the stable is the highest significance of and that's in large part because it retains its integrity entirely. There's a modern wing, a ring that's been added to the back, which we don't necessarily consider part of that significant construction, but the U-shaped building itself, which has been is virtually unchanged, I think, from its original construction, retains extraordinary, integrity, and so that for us is the highest significance. Then there's another tier of considerable significance, in which we find, for instance, the Manor House, which is a prominent and important building, but it's been so transformed over time that I think it can't claim the same level as the stables, for instance. Along with it, the Carriage House, the Boathouse, the Playhouse, or what's also called the Pink House, and the Greenhouse are falling into that considerable significant category. And then there's a third tier, some significance: the White House, the Bathhouse, the Beach Cottage, and the Squash Court. So happy to field questions if it's would be helpful to talk about any of that.
So when you do the tours on Saturday, how much information will you be sharing?
I'd be happy to share all the historical information that comes up, and we'll always learn. I mean, I think it was the case last time. I learned a ton from people who have experience these buildings firsthand, so I'm hoping that I'll learn a lot there. But I'd be prepared, unless you feel otherwise, to share as much of the historical information
that's great.
as we can.
So,
And try to bring, old photographs and supplemental,
That'd be
material.
great.
Yeah.
so with the survey, I don't know if I heard you right, are you creating blueprints from?
Yes.
Of the buildings and things like that?
Yeah.
So what's the time frame of when those are going to be available, at least in there, not down to the light switches and the, everything, but because if people can't go upstairs at the main house or into the basement to the wine cellar and things like that, those blueprints, I think, will be very interesting to the public to be able to virtually walk through, and say, oh, this is cool. Look at, there's this many bedrooms upstairs, or there's that many, And
That's a great idea.
so, I mean, to the extent that we can share PDFs or whatever on the site, on the website, so that, especially afterwards, I mean, even if they're not available on the 16th, if they're available within a month after the 16th, people still have a very good memory of that front staircase. And where does that front staircase lead to? Or what's upstairs at the stables, or, right?
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah, so we will have those. We're working on them right now, and we will have those.
I was having a similar thought when you were talking about the history and sharing the history on at the workshop. How do we memorialize that? I mean, maybe be.
He's got a report, and that will go on the website and be downloadable for everybody.
Fantastic.
So it's a draft, because there's still, and it will, in some ways, I would imagine, I mean, you'll write it, it's conditional, because as he's already acknowledged, like, there's limits to how, but it's pretty, it's an impressive amount of.
It's fascinating.
It's really fascinating, but the minute we put it up, like, I almost want it to be a living document, because, the people who will come to that and read that probably will have all sorts of material that they can bring to it. I mean, it'd be wonderful to think that somewhere there are, all sorts of, photographs and that can be sewn into this story that will really give it an incredible richness.
If the walls could talk, right?
If the walls could talk, exactly. I mean, it's a great, important part of Darien's history, and I think it's, something that should be just continuously built upon, I think. Sarah has been very helpful, Sarah Kina, who's the town historian.
As to your opinion on the significance that you assigned to each of the buildings, on the State House, would you put the wings in the same significance as the main house?
I would put the southern wing, the Addison Meisner designed wing, as a much higher significance than the northern wing. I know is it the Pelican?
Dolphin.
Sorry, the Dolphin. Yeah. For a number of reasons, I don't think I would yet put them in the same category though as the stable. So I think they would remain at some considerable significance designation.
Yeah, but that's a great point, Dan, because the Juliet is pure from the architecture point of view. Jeff, any questions? No?
And I'll just sort of add that what's amazing about having this information is it is exactly what we need to start to help everyone make good decisions. So it's great. It's incredibly exciting. The last thing we wanted to touch on, because we had originally had Ben coming tonight, but then we decided to devote an entire meeting to him, is I thought, just because it's felt so important to touch on this in sort of each conversation, a few slides that he'll elaborate on a lot more on the 20th, but if we go to the next slide, on governance, I think it's just to build off that very late night conversation we were starting at our last meeting, and to have layered in some of the findings from the outreach that we've now summarized. And so this sort of sense that as we plan for the management of the future of Great Island, that we find a mode of financial sustainability and revenue generation that is aligned with this kind of conservation-focused open space, because it does feel there's clear direction that that's what the community wants the island to be. And so how do we start to narrow in how we're thinking about those? And I think what we're very clear about is trying to get more determination around the mix of programming. So what we want to have happen is a kind of next step that needs clarity. And as it relates to that, then we need to understand how we fund that. And what are those sources? And from those two understandings, that's where we arrive at probably the right understanding of the governance solution for who's going to operate and manage what we come up with as a recipe. So there's a little bit of like, let's try and figure out a couple of these things first before we jump ahead. At the same time, we want to be clear about like what those options are. So if you go to the next slide, I think some of the things based on what we already shared tonight that have come forward as real interests and priorities are summarized here. And hospitality is a smaller one, so these bubbles are not by scale, but the passive personal use is really number one. And so how we start to balance all of these as we think about the programming is what we're embarking on. And then starting to really think about between public and private, what does that mean? And if you really want to stay more in the public, how much is just the city budget, or do we seek federal grants or some kind of outside other public monies? And then how much is earned from things that happen related to the island versus how much is philanthropic or in other way comes from private sources. So let's go to the next, and I think last slide we have for this. We've been looking at a series of case studies that feel relevant, and I just brought one tonight because it was the one that came up again and again in the comments from the community. And so we thought we would just sort of foreground so people can start thinking about it. Waveney Park has a governance structure which is shared public and nonprofit in terms of operations and management. Day-to-day, the Conservancy does a lot, but the town still does do some. And I think we thought, Lori, maybe thinking of you, the recreation department gets to be on Waveney, not to suggest self-interest from town employees, but no, that's a joke. But I did think that was interesting that they get, as a sort of perk for being a public servant. That's a pretty lovely place to have your office. And then in terms of funding, a huge part of the funding is coming from private donations and grants and fundraising. And I know that that's something that you all have raised as being a potential avenue for this community. And so it was interesting to see that that does seem to be working pretty reliably for Waveney. And then the town does still make a pretty, not enormous, but meaningful contribution every year as well. And then a much smaller part of the funding comes from actual revenue on the park itself. And I think that's our final slide for this evening, with the exception of I do have some trash can nominations for you all if you want to look at those, including color options that we've tested for you and charts. And I don't know if you really want to hold that full vote tonight or not, but that is something that you asked for too.
Yes.
So just sharing that that's here. And for fun, we have merch options too, and not to be decisive, but for those of you who want to think about possible hats or shirts that we could start thinking about, we have some teaser options as like thoughts. And then Monica, for you, the flyers to get posted around town. So I'm going to hand this to you now.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Becca before we go on to the garbage cans?
I'm just curious, excuse me, in Waveney, you mentioned grants, public sector grants, what sort of grants? I looked at a lot of grants, and I haven't really seen too many that I think would apply, so I'm just curious what their experience was.
So because I haven't dug into that, I'm going to share your question with Ben and Carrie and have them be very prepared to answer that, because I unfortunately just cannot tell you exactly which ones, but they did find some, so
okay.
We'll get back to you on that.
Yeah. That'll be our next meeting, so we'll cover
But
that.
I'll preview that question.
Any thoughts? Any questions?
No, I think just to Bruce's point that he made on Waverly was an important one, but my mind immediately went to the governance piece of Waverly as a comparison, not just the geographical footprint, so I thought that was excellent to have. I'd love to see just other options of examples around this that, Waverly seems great, but what are our other options?
They have them in the works, so they'll have them for the 20.
So we covered a lot. We covered structures. We covered the event on Saturday. Does anybody have any questions on either of those? No?
Do you need any volunteers for
We
anything?
do, yes. So I will ask you to reach out to me if you are available, and if you're just kind of open to doing wherever you're needed, that would be great.
Do you have a list of roles that are required?
Some require a uniform. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. We will be collecting waivers for anybody that wants to go into the buildings, and we'll need help for that, for sure. And then it will just depend on if how many people show up on the island as far as tours go. So we might need some. Reed might need some backup there. Right?
Thank you, Monica.
Yeah.
I know it'd be helpful if we had somebody sort of bringing up the rear, making sure people don't disappear upstairs and downstairs and things like that as we go through the buildings. That would be.
I think what we'll do is we'll rope off.
Okay, that's great.
Yeah.
If you'd like a whistle though, Dan, should someone.
Of course he wants a whistle.
You can sort of see it.
I can whistle without.
Okay, so next is to discuss and take action on the garbage cans, and we are going to, as Tony mentioned, all of the work will be done by next Saturday. So Tony and his crew will be working very hard next week. Myself and Lori and Jeff and town council and some town staff will be looking at the property on Tuesday to figure out where the signage should go. And then Tony and his crew will be putting it up. So what they're also going to do is they have pet waste stations, and they have some temporary garbage cans. So we will put up some temporary garbage cans. So we'll be deciding today on the replacement for those temporary garbage cans. And Tony, what do we need, 3?
Three's a good start.
3's a good start, okay. So if we need more, we'll come back, but we'll be going with this.
We'll need more, but I think 3's a good start. Coming into the winter, it'll be less picky yet.
Right, okay, all right.
Hey, Monica, are we done with Reed Hildebrand?
Well, Reed is, they're
involved in this?
They're involved in this.
They supplied, got it,
Yes.
thank you.
But after that, we're kind of
Got it.
finished with the Reed Hildebrand portion, unless you have something you want to ask.
I don't.
No, okay.
Are we on garbage can?
We're on garbage cans now.
Tony, have you looked at these?
I don't know if it's the ones that I sent.
I mean, do they work for how your people handle garbage?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, they're all pretty easy.
Yeah.
So I can just give you some background. There are a bunch of different. We had 2 models basically that we wanted to share with you, but they come in a variety of color options, and so generally our sense is that probably a sort of charcoal gray or a bronze is maybe the most safe direction, given that there's a lot of open questions. But also we know that dark green is a color that people like in Darien and is a conventional kind of park color as well. So we've shown this. This can, which you guys have, I think, or you all have, sorry, in maybe black or other possible colors, but this is what is used at the breakers, and many historic sort of mansion properties use this one to show you, Tony. It's available from a number of different vendors, basically, but it meets most contemporary needs, and it's pretty tough. But
It's heavy,
sort of,
right? I've seen those around. They're very heavy,
they're
aren't
very
they?
heavy, yeah, and
Which
there's
is
a reason
good.
why.
Which is
yeah,
good.
Exactly.
I'm saying
There's a
that as a
reason why they're
plus.
used by so many, both parks, but also historic preservation properties and organizations.
Does
So
that have a lid inside?
there is a lid
There
option.
is.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Because I think with all the animals,
Can a
it's gotta
dome
be.
go on that, a dome?
I think we have the option with the dome. A dome can go on it.
I think without a dome, it's gotta be a nice
Yeah.
raccoon.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I'm worried about.
Yeah, so, I think the slide, even if we're not gonna project it,
Sure,
can you just pull it up, because I think the slide that we made.
Works.
Yeah, so this is, it has a rain garden in it,
With
but
the dome at the
You know, we just
uh,
have like a push
so
door.
we can follow up with the animal, with the raccoon provision. So we'll send, we have a, yeah, pavilion. We just showed the option with its flare top, which is a sort of rain guard, but we can look at the animal. I think there's an animal attachment too, because it is just such a popular bin. The other one that we thought was potentially interesting and has a relationship to some of the stables detailing, and is just a little bit more contemporary, is this option, which has a black dome insert, but it can come in, a moss green or a forest green or something as an outside, and it is a little bit less neutral and a little bit less expected. And given the sort of design, I think, expressiveness of a lot of the buildings, we wanted to give you all an option that has a slightly more timeless but future-oriented expression. Yes, Bruce?
The green one, I think it said $801.
I think it's $812 and $881 are the two prices. So basically, you are in the $800 to $900 range,
So-
and there's some add-ons that related to dome or lid that might cause that number to shift slightly.
So, meaning 880, like the contemporary one of them's 880, one of them's 800, so they're all in the same ballpark. This one appear, unless it's just the photograph or it appears narrower, is the gallon,
No, what's the capacity
is the
of both of
capacity
them?
the same?
I'm gonna have to put my glasses back on, sorry.
While she's looking at the question I got for you, Tony, you said they're heavy. These have inserts. Is weight an issue or not an issue for your team?
No,
I may not have that data.
kind
Is
of
it on
outside is heavy. but
Yeah.
You just put an insert in there.
Got it.
that you pick up. And just so you know, like garbage can, Monica and I talked about this, you think like, oh, this is gonna cost $60 or something like that. For a good garbage can, that is the price. You can find them cheaper, but they will be cheaper quality. And these things will last a long time. So, when I first looked at it in the sticker shop, I was like, wow, that's kind of the going rate.
What are they mounted? Are they mounted to anything? Or are they?
No, they're just freestanding.
Just the weight.
And they don't
The
disappear.
weight does that, yeah.
And the other one is,
And the weight too of this one.
Helps.
So I think while Meg is looking that up, start thinking about, do you want something that's traditional, or do you want something that is just a little bit more modern and might go into the future?
Oh, is this one easier to tip over? It seems taller and skinnier.
It's basically the difference between 30 gallons or 40 gallons, approximately.
Which one's 40?
The green.
40 is
Yeah.
the green one.
Yep.
And the base, it looks like is wider on the green one than it is on the more
The
modern one.
diameter of the base.
So the green one, looks like it has about a 28-inch diameter. That's the lid though, so I think the actual exterior is wider.
Is the opening on top the same on each of these, or is one a wider opening?
The other one is just the weight. I'm curious about the weight comparison of the two.
you get right back to it.
I think what we can do is we can send you all.
Anyway, I think they want to vote tonight. They just need to get 3, so it's just not, I think you want to make the right decision, but it's not 100% binding for the entire waste vision future of
For the future of Great Island.
I'm having a hard time remembering, but do we have these at the high school? In blue
We have
and
those
in
town.
black?
I swear we have those in.
I think the recycling
Yeah,
ones
these
are
in black. You're right.
I think
Down
they're
by
at the high school by like the
baseball
stadium
field.
and, so, as far as, this seems to, I'm curious to hear the answer, but this looks heavier than this, but you never know what the material is.
Well, does anybody have an opinion right now? Good, let's wrap this up.
Just because we have some of these in
You knew
town
that.
already, I'm running this way,
Okay.
and I've seen these all over, as Becca said, these are in a lot of properties that are pretty nice properties.
We
Okay.
gotta resolve color too, and my
good enough for
opinion
the
is that
breakers.
the charcoal is probably a good choice because it tends to blend in with the
Yeah.
trunks of trees, and you
Yes.
got 8 million of them on the property, so.
Yes.
So, okay, so that, I was thinking blending also, but I was going with more the bronze. But is the bronze like a bronze, or is it more like a?
Happily, we can get it, we can get pretty much any color. If you want to see a typical color chart, there is, we could also choose this color, which is, Dan, how would you feel about this color, which
Onyx.
is really a blend of a charcoal and a bronze?
It's
Just
certainly gonna
really-
hide a lot of stuff.
Can't find
If
it.
there's,
If you guys like, I mean, I can't see what it looks like on a big huge structure like that, but, yeah, I like that darker, more
That's why
natural
we
color.
want it to basically
blend-
disappear.
Yeah.
Exactly
and
right.
Not
Okay,
be
so, yeah.
something that comes into the
Disappears
foreground.
better.
and I think, I see there's matte black, but are these other colors gloss, or are they matte?
Well, why don't we say we can get back to, but the idea that it's matte and that it's
Ideally.
it's a
Darker.
gray with possibly a warm gray or a bronze, and we will make a nomination to tomorrow. Does that sound good?
Yeah.
Okay. So,
But do you need to vote? Sorry.
If you can make that happen, then we could vote on, if they make that happen, then,
On the 20th?
okay,
well,
okay.
Can we do it online too? Yeah. A virtual?
vote.
Well, we can vote on it next, okay.
Okay,
Now-
well,
Do we need to vote?
Yeah,
I mean, we have $25,000 approved to spend on the open, we didn't vote on the signs, on which sign to buy, did we? So, I mean, if we trust that you've heard the feedback, is it,
Yes, I think we can do that. We can vote to let Reed Hildebrand choose the best color option for us.
For this one.
For that one.
And we
Does
want
that
an
work?
animal lid.
Oh.
And an
So
animal
Just a point of order, are we voting, or are we making a recommendation to the Board of Selectmen who ultimately
No,
decides?
this is us.
This is us, this is us, okay.
Did we vote on that one?
No, we haven't
Okay.
voted on that one, but Jeff, are you in favor of the other one?
I am.
You are? Strongly?
I just think that it is different. This is a different place. To me, this is a little bit less obtrusive and kind of signals like, we're kind of looking for minimal needed trash use, but it's, even though that looks nice, that's a garbage can, and this looks like something more refined to me, and just maybe connotes something in that design. If
Okay.
it's significantly less capacity or will tip over easier, I would amend that, but just looking at these pictures, I would.
Okay, here's an idea. Does everybody,
Jeff, I can't see which one you're
I'm
actually
sorry, the one
referring to.
with the
the skinny
with
one,
the-
Jim?
lid
Yeah.
on it, yeah.
Okay, here's an idea.
My only comment I would say on that is I always see leaves and garbage kind of stuck in the side of those sometimes at the park. All those little holes, but
it's it is a diamond pattern, which is very utilitarian looking also, in the history of garbage cans that I've seen.
Which
In your
is-
lifetime.
Which is a good thing or not?
I'd say, to me, it's a negative. I think it looks a little bit more like cheaper.
Okay.
I get it's not cheaper, but monetarily, I guess. But you see what now that I look more closely at it, you see it's like not chicken wire, but it's that
Feels
diamond
municipal to me.
pattern.
I
that-
think Jeff's point is that he's trying to make it as unobtrusive as possible, right, Jeff?
Yes, it just seems like a more subtle design, although I agree, Bruce, I hadn't really thought of it like that.
Okay.
Can we remind everyone where these are going?
Wherever Tony and Lori and Jeff.
Probably space them out kind of front circle.
But near buildings or, near nature where we'd want them to be less intrusive.
Haven't we talked about, like, by the carriage house, because it's so central in the loop that, and it's easy for the people that have to empty them, it's probably one there.
Yeah, that's a good
Yeah,
spot.
we did
Probably down
comment
near
on
the
that.
dock and up
Yeah.
in the front circle, but, you know.
And the other thing I'm
Spaced
thinking,
out.
although we're going into the winter now, is where people are most likely to picnic. Because then they're gonna have garbage they want to get rid of.
Okay.
Well, they're portable, so they can be moved too.
There probably should be one, as you know where the oil fill tank thing that we were fixing, which is kind of like
Behind
by
the
the
house?
end of the driveway that leads to the back of the main house? Maybe one there.
Okay, let's settle on the garbage can first, and then we'll figure out where to put it. So, does anyone else like the tall skinny one? Okay. Mike and Jim, do you have an opinion on this one? Okay. All right.
I like I prefer the flare top with the rain guard.
All right, so Jeff, to compromise, what if we get the flare top with the raccoon situation, and we get it in as unobtrusive of a color as possible? How does that?
That's fine with me.
Okay.
Talking about onyx?
Okay, so we're still discussing, but here would be a motion, is that we go with the flare top, and we give the authority to Reed Hildebrand to choose the color and share their suggestion with Tony to then purchase the garbage cans. Does that work for everybody? Jim, Mike, you good? Yeah, okay.
All good.
Okay, all right, so, can somebody make a motion on that, or do I have to say it?
You just did.
You just did, I
I'll move
think.
it if you say it.
Okay. May I have a motion to go with the flare top garbage can and give the authority to Reed Hildebrand to choose the color, and to give the authority to Tony to then go ahead and purchase the garbage cans?
Purchase 3?
Purchase 3.
Preferably matte.
So we're giving the color to Reed, but I'm sure they got
They
the
heard you.
message.
So moved.
Okay, second?
Mike Burke, second. Oh, Mike.
Mike seconds? Okay, so Lori moved, Mike seconds. All in favor? Jim? Okay. Unanimous. Thank you. All right, great. Love you guys. Love your interest. All right, I don't have my glasses, but, okay.
Schedule. Meeting schedule.
The schedule. So, schedule's next. Yeah. Might have cut off there. So Linda put together a schedule for Wednesdays. It would be in room 119, and that is because this room is already claimed for certain Wednesday, not every third Wednesday, but anyhow, this just makes life a lot easier. So the meetings would start at 6 o'clock, and they would be in room 119, and they would be on the fourth Wednesday of every month, except for the two in November and December, as Linda mentioned. So, any discussion on the calendar?
Any chance those meetings can be at 7?
7 would work. We do have a lot of staff, Mike, that is at these meetings, so that's why if we could do it at 6. Does 7 work for your team, Reed? It does. Okay.
Does it make sense to suggest?
7 would be better for me, just commuting back and forth to the city.
Okay. Okay. So we have 2 people that would like 7, and we have Reed that would like 6:30. Do we have any other opinions from people at the table?
7's better for me.
I'm fine either way.
I'm flexible.
Either works for me.
Okay. Is 6:30 an option? Because that's Reed Hildebrand's.
We're actually flexible,
You're
but that seemed
flexible?
like that's a hybrid between the two times that, I don't know
Okay.
if that works with the train
That-
schedule.
Yeah, it might not work with the train schedule. That's what I'm thinking. Would 7 work for you and Mike?
No, 6:30 you mean?
Yeah, 6:30, I'm sorry. Would 6:30 work? Compromise.
Why is it a compromise?
Well,
Yeah, I just can't regularly get back here for a 6:30 meeting, just the way the trains work. So I mean,
okay,
if,
all right.
if we can't do 7, then we have to do earlier.
Okay,
I'm fine with 7.
okay. Reed, can you do 7?
We can do 7.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I
So-
think the one thing I would say is, I think if we do 7, we should try and keep to 2 hours or less so that everyone can go home at a reasonable, like maybe we can all work hard to try.
How about we
and-
open with Reed Hildebrand at all those meetings where you're presenting and,
Well, no, so I'm thinking about the staff, I'm thinking about staff, if there's a way to make sure that staff.
Okay.
Can, so that, maybe that's also the compromise, that we work to have sort of.
That's where I was going
short-
to ask the question about, are we done with Reed Hildebrand? Put the non-Reed Hildebrand stuff at the back of the agenda, non-staff stuff. There's not much, but 10, 15 minutes of this, minutes and stuff like that.
Right, right. Okay, all right, so that's a good consideration. Okay, so may I have a motion to approve the calendar as scheduled with the edit that meetings would start at 7 instead of 6? May I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Jeff moves.
Mike is second.
Mike seconds. All in favor?
Unanimous.
Jim? Aye. Unanimous. Okay, thank you. All right, next up is to discuss the minutes from the September 30th meeting. And I handed out something to everybody that, and Jim and Mike, you'll understand this. The public comments, we're going to go with the format that the Board of Selectmen uses. And so Linda wrote up the revised public comment section for the September 30th meeting that, the minutes that mimics what the Board of Selectmen does. And so everybody has seen that here. And are there any other edits or corrections on the September 30th minutes?
just one. On the third page, it says, Mr. Palin moved to recommend approval to expand the resident access, I think is the word.
It's just a typo.
Oh, it's a typo. Okay,
Yep. And I have one edit, I was not at that meeting. I was
okay. All
tied
right.
in virtually but could not participate. If I recall, it was not announced as a virtual meeting.
Okay, that's right, you called in. Okay,
As Julia Kane's name is misspelled.
okay. Okay,
And then Monica, this follows the comments I sent in earlier when it says Mr. Palin moved the second amendment to remove section 5(2)(I). There is no 5(2)(I). It should say 5, open parentheses, 2 little I, and in closed parentheses.
okay.
Thanks.
Jeff, I think you were not at that meeting as well.
What number is that, Jim?
I think I'm on that.
Third at the top. Oh, okay. Okay.
So,
Okay.
No, Mr.
And,
Davis?
okay, with
this just
that. And Julia Kane's name corrected and Mark Adeletta deleted. Okay. So with those edits, may I have a motion to approve the September 30th special meeting minutes? Somebody move? Lori moves, Mike seconds. All in favor? Okay. Okay, unanimous. Thanks, Dan. Okay, next is to discuss and approve the special meeting minutes for October 17th. Any corrections, edits there?
On the second page, there's going to be two Cs.
Okay,
Where that is.
okay.
Yeah, then, it says you express thanks to Ms. Board, Ms. Palin for working the signage for Jeff at the table. I'll go down to me, so give Jeff his credit. And that's just a typo there, should be an H.
Okay. With those edits,
I was at that meeting.
okay. And you are
Okay.
Am I listed?
You are.
Yeah.
Okay, with those edits, are there any other edits? Okay.
I would just remove up on the very top where it says after the virtual link, the 2 little asterisks, because there's no footnote and there's a whole bunch of other double asterisks, so
Got
just
it.
for
Okay,
tidiness.
okay.
Thanks.
Okay, with those edits, may I have a motion to approve the October 17th special meeting minutes? Dan moves, Kip seconds. All in favor? Jim, Mike? Yeah, good? Okay, all right,
Aye.
unanimous. Thank you. Okay. May I have a motion to adjourn?
So
Mike, Mark moves, Bruce
Second.
seconds. All in favor? Mike?